Alrighty, back to the APIs and working with them and everything about APIs. Now, so far, we have looked over how to access APIs through a browser, access APIs through curl requests, work with completely free APIs that don't need an API key, access an API endpoint, get a response, access an API endpoint that needs an API key and get a response, and access an API endpoint that needs an API key and can take some options and also get a customized response. Now, how would we take all of these things together, bring them together, and do the following? When I click this button, I should go to the Spoonacular API, get a random recipe, and display it here. All right, so the starter code should be in your handout, and the starter code should have the Axios already in there, but just in case it doesn't, again, Axios, grab the code, put it into the script.js before the index.js. So let's plan out what we need to do. We need to go to the Spoonacular API, get a random recipe, click a button and display that recipe, and well, the browser needs to display it. All right, so this is going to be somewhat of a code along and whatnot. The starter code will already have some styles, very basic styles. This is not about CSS. This is about actually handling logic in JavaScript, and the index that the HTML will already be with the specific divs and with the specific classes and IDs. So we can jump straight to the JavaScript logic and actually implementing this. Click the generated recipe and the recipe should appear here. Well, first I'm going to open my developer tools. And when I click the generate recipe, well, nothing happens, right? Because why does nothing happen? Again, this should be review from your section on JavaScript and the DOM. Well, because we have a defined button here, but nothing, this button does nothing. It just exists. It's not connected to anything. So it's just existing, doing nothing. So in order for our button to do something, well, we need to do something with the button. So I'm going to grab this button and I will grab it by ID. You can grab it by class name, you can grab it by ID, but I'm going to grab it by ID, and our ID for the button is the generate button. Again, spelling matters, the case matters, everything matters. This has to be exact. And in fact, because it has to be exact, I'm just going to copy and paste it because it has to be exact. Something for a sanity check. This would be called a sanity check. Let's make sure that this button exists. Maybe I misspelled it. Maybe I did something wrong. Maybe completely messed something up. If I refresh it, well, I do have this button here. So I've grabbed the button and now it exists as an object in JavaScript. In fact, if I misspelled it, let's see what happens if I misspell it. And I grab generate butto, not button. And now if I refresh it, it's null. Why? Well, because JavaScript is looking for this ID here, but it doesn't exist. An ID exists for generate button. So Again, spelling, case, everything matters. So we have it here. Okay, so, well, we want to click this generate recipe button and we want a recipe to appear here. Fine. So the next thing that we want to do is have an event listener. This is back to the events. And I will use a function here, a callback. And the callback takes the event, but we don't need it. Again, I will want to do a sanity check and I'll say I click the button. That's our sanity check that our event listener is working. I guess I will remove this for now. And I will leave it as I clicked the button. Let's reload. And I click the button. Okay, so that is working. Right, so what do we want to do? Well, we want to do an Axios request to the recipes and grab a random recipe and display it here. Well, if we remember from the last one, we need a what? We need a API key. This is my API key. Get your own. Even if you use it, you probably won't be able to use it. It's free, get it. So, Spoonacular API key. Will go here. Right, and then we'll come back to our full documentation. So we have the API key. Now, what if I want to do a random recipe? So I will search a random, get random recipes. All right, so this is the endpoint and it will return some random recipes. Cool. That's exactly what we need. So let's do it. Let's then have a function called get random recipe. And what do we want to do here? Well, we want to do a get request for Axios. Now, as I've said in the handout, take a look at the handout. This is a culmination of all the units from before. In the previous examples, just because it was a very short example, I was doing the following. Axios.get and whatever the address here, and then .then. Now, this is still valid JavaScript syntax. However, the better way to do it is with async await. Now, if you remember the promises videos and the promises coursework, async await is actually promises. It's a new way of writing out promises. So we will do this with async await. So I'm going to have this function to be an async function. And I will have the response to be await axios.get. And this, because now I don't have to do the whole .then and so on. Because now async function will await for the promise to resolve. And what do I want? Well, I want the get request, right? I want the get request to this endpoint, the random one. And let's paste it in here. Okay, cool. I have an async function called get random recipe. I will have the response and I'm waiting for it. I'm using the new notation. Everything is great. Let me console log the response. Amazing. I click the button and I will call the get random recipe. I click the button here and this function calls and we'll get the random recipe, and we'll console log this random recipe response. Absolutely nothing can go wrong, right? All right, let's see. Let's go to our awesome food app. Let's restart everything. Remember, I need to reload everything so that the new data is loaded into the browser. And let's click the generate recipe. Oh wait, request failed with 401, so on and so forth. Why? Right. If you're paying attention, we need this API key. We need this API key here. And how do we throw it in here? Well, a couple ways. Let's for now do string interpolation. So we will have this API key variable. And again, this has to be case matters, spelling matters, everything matters. And we will pass in the Spoonacular API key. Perfect. Now we have the Spoonacular API key. We should get a response, and we should console log it, right? Again, reload, because if I click this again, it's going to be the same thing, because this is still using the old code. I need to reload the browser and get the new code. The new code will be taken in by the browser. All right, now I have a random recipe. I have a response. I have some data here. I have the recipes, an array, and I have a random recipe here. Good. All right, so what is our next task here? Well, our next task here is to take whatever the response we get here and whatever the data we get here, and instead of this, we want to show maybe a title of the recipe, and we want to show, I don't know, the recipe description and whatnot, right? Something like, I don't know, let's say we have a summary and a title. We want to show the title and the summary for now. That's it. Let's keep it very simple. All right, so this comes back on the things we have learned before: DOM manipulation, creation new elements, and inserting new elements into the DOM. So the first thing that I want to do, well, we have the response. At least we know that. We have the response, we have the recipe. So first, I want to create a new div which will go in here instead of this text here. And then I want to have, another h1 tag that will also go in there. That will be the recipe title. And then once I have both of those, I want to replace this with those two divs. All right, let's do that. So let's create a new div. I'll type this out. So I will call it very creatively new div, and again, this is going to have a create element. I think it's create element if I remember correctly, and it's going to be a div. I also want to create, oops, and I have a typo here. I also want to create a header element because I want to have a title and I want to have a description. So I'll create a new header element. I'll call it h3. I want to have a h3 header. So document create element. Nope, not ready state. Create element h3. All right, so we have that. And then what do I want to do? I want to set something in the header element. Probably. I want to set the title, right? Because we have a title here. German rhubarb cake with moringa, whatever. So I want to set the title into the header. So set recipe title into the header. All right, so h3.innerhtml, and all of these functional references, they're all are MDN. This is the reference for the whole JavaScript web API and whatnot. It's impossible to remember all of them. Use the web MDN and look them up when you need to look them up. So, but I happen to remember that this is inner HTML. It's actually not a function, but this is going to be h3 inner HTML. And what do I want to set it to? I want to set it to the following, right? Response. And again, work with objects. So we have response.data.recipes, right? Response.data.recipes. Response.data.recipes. Now recipes is an array, so the first element, and it's the only element, right? Because we're getting the random recipe at 0, and we want to grab the title. Good. I'm hoping this works. Now, in the new div, I want to set the summary. So, new div dot also in HTML equals response, and again working with an object, response dot data dot recipes. Once again, response dot data dot recipes, and recipes is an array, so the first index, 0th index. And I want to grab the what? I want to grab the description. Do we have a description? We don't have a description. We have a summary. We have a key called summary. Now, you see how all of these concepts are coming together? DOM manipulation, objects, arrays, everything coming together into one now. Into one, making an application that is all rounded together. I'm not even talking about the CSS, because CSS is, something out of scope here. CSS is already there in your starter code. What we're focusing on is the actual logic here. Okay, so we have the new div which we created. We have the new h3 element, the header 3 element which you created. We set the inner HTML of the header to the title. We set the inner HTML of the div to the summary. Now what we want to do is the following. We want to grab this div here, food display or display div, the ID, and we want to insert what we created in here. Again, this is where the whole DOM manipulation comes in. So let's do that. Well, but how do we do that? Well, we need to grab it first. So we have the button here. So we can just say, I don't know, I'll call it display div. I'll call display div equals document.getElementById. And what is it here? It is called display div. And again, I'm going to copy and paste it. And we have it here. And now I made a mistake. And here it is. All right, so we have the display div. Hopefully. Now, when we create this h3 element, and when we set the h3 element in HTML to the title, what do we need to do? Well, we need to then append it to the display div. And it is append child and h3. Again, all of these methods are on the JavaScript reference. There are many of them. It's almost impossible to cover every one of them. It's just kind of like you have to open up the JavaScript reference to use it as table contents. After a while, it becomes, well, kind of like mechanical, essentially. And here, I also want to append the new div to the display div. All right. So let's see what we have. Let's see what we have here. When we click this button here, this function runs, get random recipe. It's an async function, which is a promise. It will await for this Axios request and will get a random recipe. It will console log a response. I guess we don't need it, but we'll leave it for now. After that, it will create a new div element. It will also create a new h3 element. In the h3 element, we will take what we got from the Spoonacular API. We'll go to response.data.recipes, the first and only recipe because we only get one, and we'll grab the title of it. Then we will take the newly created div that we have and we'll grab the summary. It will append the title and we'll append the summary to the already existing display div here. All right, so let's see if this weird mess of a code and what it does. Let's say generate recipe, and we have an error here because it is telling us the what? Display div, telling us that display div append child is not a function at get a random recipe, and that is because it's get element by ID and not get animations. The fun part is autocorrect. There we go. My autocorrect is fighting against me. And look what we have now. Now we took the data that we had here. We took the data that we had here from our response object. We've processed it. We created new elements and we threw it onto the DOM. We created new DOM elements. Now there's a couple problems here because if we keep clicking it, right, we just keep building it up, right? So it'll just keep building up, keep building up, keep building up, keep building up. So one thing that we can do here is clear this up at any time the function is being clicked here. So anytime we're grabbing the new recipe, we will clear up the container of the new recipe. So in this case, it's as easy as setting the inner HTML of the display div to be an empty function. Empty string. Now, when we run this, and we run this again, and we run this again, now this will do the following: a very small change, which does the following. Every time this function runs, now the display div will be reset to the blank, essentially. So at the beginning, we have the default value. Now every time we click generate recipe, the default value will be deleted and then the recipe will be inserted. Then every time you click this again, the recipe will be deleted and a new recipe will be inserted, so on and so forth, so on and so forth. Now, what happens? What happens if we do something wrong? Let's say we've misspelled our API here and completely misspelled. Now I did API nacular.com recipes random something. Let's save this. Let's run this. And let's click generate recipe. We have an error, but our small app is not showing us an error. Let's see what we can do to show that error in our last review video.